The padlock went on at 9 in the morning. It was September of 1958, and the man doing it was from the First National Bank of Murfreesboro, and he had a county notice folded in the breast pocket of his jacket, and a deputy sheriff standing 6 feet behind him, in case anybody made it complicated. He worked the hasp over the door handles of Denton's auto repair with the particular efficiency of a man who had done this before and intended to be somewhere else by 10. Earl Denton stood in the gravel lot with his hands at his sides and watched it happen. 6 years he had run those bays. 6 years of oil changes and valve jobs and transmissions pulled on a creeper in the dark. The kind of work that leaves a man's hands permanently stained no matter how long he scrubs. He was 41 years old, and he did not say anything. The street had not gone quiet because it was a quiet street. It had gone quiet because there were 3 men watching from the sidewalk across the road, a mechanic named Hatch, who had worked for Earl since 1955, a parts supplier named Delbert, who had driven over from Smyrna that morning with a delivery that was now not going to happen, and an older woman named Mrs. Pruitt, who had brought her Buick in 4 times and always brought coffee cake. None of them moved. At the far end of the block, a man in a canvas jacket and a battered tan Stetson leaned against the door of a black Ford and watched the padlock go on. He had pulled over to ask directions. He had not asked them yet. Here is the story. Earl Denton came home from Korea in the spring of 1953. He had been gone 26 months. He came back with a Purple Heart from the Imjin River engagement of April 1951, a hearing loss in his left ear from a mortar round that landed closer than it should, and a set of tools he had bought off a retiring mechanic in Busan for $30 and shipped home in a wooden crate because he already knew what he was going to do when he got back. He had grown up watching his father work on cars in the driveway of their house on Maple Street in Murphy. His father had done it for love, not money. The family money came from a feed and seed operation his grandfather had built in 1919. But Earl had watched the way his father's face changed when an engine turned over that hadn't been turning over, and he had decided early that this was the thing. He opened the shop in April of 1952, before he shipped out. He had a lease on a 2-bay garage on Vine Street, a hand-painted sign, $800 in savings, and a cousin named Jean who agreed to run the counter while Earl was overseas. Jean ran it for 13 months and then moved to Atlanta for a girl, and Earl's mother ran it the last 11 months herself, a woman of 62 who had never changed a tire in her life and learned to read a repair log in the same week she learned to make change for a 20. Earl came back and found the shop in reasonable order and a stack of receipts his mother had kept in a car. He sat at the counter for a long time reading them. He did not say much about that. He had 1 employee by 1954, 2 by 1956. He did transmission work, which most small shops in the county sent out, which meant the work came to him from 3 other garages in addition to his own customers. He was not getting rich. He was building something. A man could tell the difference if he was paying attention. The debt was $3,800. It had started as a short-term equipment loan in 1956 for a hydraulic lift, the kind of lift that let him take on the transmission work he couldn't do on the floor. He had made every payment for 18 months. Then his parts supplier out of Nashville went under in the fall of 1957, and Earl had to absorb 2 months of inflated costs while he found a new source, and the payments. He went to the bank in February of 1958 and explained it. The man at the bank explained the terms back to him. The terms had not changed. By July, the bank had filed. By August, the date was set. By September 3rd, a man named Curtis Blaine from First National had a padlock in his jacket pocket and a county notice beside it, and a deputy who had drawn the short straw that morning. Curtis Blaine was not a cruel man. He had a job and a process, and the process had run its course. He worked the padlock through the hasp with the same expression he used for everything level, efficient. pointed slightly to the left of the person he was dealing with, so as not to make unnecessary eye contact. He told Earl Denton that the bank's office on Church Street could discuss next steps regarding any personal property inside the building, and that he was sorry for the circumstances. He meant it the way men mean things when the meaning costs them nothing. Earl had a crescent wrench in his right hand. He had been in the middle of a job when he held it at his side and nodded at Curtis Blaine the way you nod at weather. The deputy shifted his weight in the gravel. Hatch, across the road, had set down the coffee cup he'd been holding since 8 o'clock. Delbert from Smyrna had put both hands in his jacket pockets. Mrs. Pruitt had both hands around her purse. The padlock closed. 6 years. The hydraulic lift. The transmission worked from 3 other garages. The coffee can full of receipts his mother had kept for 11 months while he was at the Imjin River. Earl Denton stood in his own gravel lot with a crescent wrench in his hand, and the September light came through the gap between the buildings across the street, and he did not move. Curtis Blaine folded the county notice back into his pocket and turned toward his car. If you have ever stood in a place you built and watched someone put a lock on it, drop your state in the comments. I want to know how far this one reaches. The man at the end of the block had straightened up from the Ford. He walked the length of Vine Street at the pace of a man with nowhere particular to be and nothing to prove about it. He passed Hatch on the sidewalk without looking at him. He stopped in the gravel lot a few feet from Earl Denton. He looked at the padlock for a moment. Then he looked at Earl. "Korea," he said. It was not a question. He was looking at the way Earl was standing, the set of the shoulders, the stillness of a man who had learned how to absorb things and keep his feet. Earl said, "Imjin River." The man nodded once, slow. Something moved behind his eyes and then settled. "I've got a problem," he said. He reached up and tilted the brim of his hat against the morning sun. "I'm shooting a picture in Nashville next week, and my truck is making a sound that my regular man in California says is the rear differential, and I don't have time to ship it back. I need someone who knows." He looked at the padlock again. "Appears you might have some time." Earl said, "The shop's closed." "Not for long," the man said. "What do you owe them?" Earl told him. He said it plainly, the way you say a number you've been carrying so long it has lost whatever sting it had. The man did not react to the number. He said, "Go inside and write me a repair estimate for the differential. Whatever your shop rate is, I'll be back in an hour." He walked back to the Ford at the end of the block. He did not hurry. Curtis Blaine from First National Bank of Murfreesboro had the padlock back off the door by 11 o'clock that morning. He did not ask for an explanation. The man with the cashier's check did not offer one. Blaine wrote the receipt at the counter of his own office on Church Street with the same level expression he used for everything, and he slid it across. And the man in the tan Stetson folded it once and put it in his jacket pocket and left. He drove back to Vine Street and dropped the receipt through the mail slot in the shop door. Earl Denton found it on the floor when he went back in to finish the job he'd been in the middle of when the Ford had pulled up that morning. He read it. He read it again. He picked up the phone and called the number that had been written on the back of a business card tucked under the door alongside it. A woman answered, a studio assistant, from the sound of it. She said Mr. Wayne had left a message. The truck wasn't actually making any noise. He just needed a reason. Earl Denton set the phone down. He stood in his shop then he picked up the crescent wrench and went back to work. Earl Denton ran Denton's Auto Repair on Vine Street for 29 more years, until 1987, when he sold it to his youngest son, a man named Dennis, who had grown up handing his father tools from the time he was tall enough to reach the bench. Dennis ran it until 2004. He retired at 62. the same age Earl's mother had been when she ran the counter for 11 months, with a coffee can full of receipts. In 1971, a young man named Marcus Webb came to Vine Street looking for work. He was 23 years old, and he had come back from Vietnam the previous spring and couldn't find steady employment. Earl hired him on a Monday without asking for references. He said, "I'll tell you once how I do things. After that, I'll expect you to do them that way." Marcus worked for Earl for 16 years. When Earl retired in 1987, Marcus went to work for a fleet operation in Nashville. He became the lead. He trained 11 apprentices over the course of his career, 7 of whom went on to run their own shops in Middle Tennessee, one of whom won a regional diagnostic competition in 1999 and mentioned Earl Denton by name in the trade publication that covered it. Earl Denton died in 2003. He was 86 years old. Dennis found the receipt in the top drawer of the desk in the shop office from First National Bank of Murfreesboro, dated September 3, 1958, with a folded crease still sharp after 45 years. He had it framed. It hangs on the wall of the Vine Street shop today, in the same office, under the same window, in the same September light that moves across it every year and keeps moving. John Wayne never spoke of that morning. Not to the director he was driving to Nashville to meet, not to his co-stars on the picture. Not in any interview anybody recorded in the years that followed. Not in any letter that surfaced. The woman at the studio said he'd left one message, and that was all, and there was nothing else after it. He had a truck that wasn't making any noise. He had a cashier's check he had stopped to get before he came back down Vines. He had an hour and a reason, and that was the whole of it. There is a kind of man who sees a padlock on a door and reads the story of it without being told, who stands in a gravel lot next to a man holding a crescent wrench and knows what the wrench represents and what the stillness represents and what the 26 months away represents, who does not say anything about any of that, because it does not need to be said. It needs to be answered. That is a different thing from generosity. Generosity is something you give. This was something he owed to the Imjin River in April of 1951, to every man who came home from a place like that and picked up a tool and decided to build something anyway. The debt was his. Earl Denton just happened to be the one standing in the lot that morning. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.